Today on our 2008 Dodge Ram pickup, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs, part number F2299. So here's what our Firestone airbags are going to look like once we have them installed. Now these are going to provide us a lot more load leveling support whenever we have a heavy trailer or a heavy load in the back of our truck. Our airbags are going to be adjustable anywhere from 5 to 100 psi, giving us up to 5,000 pounds of load leveling support. Now, I do want to mention these bags are not going to increase the towing capacity of your vehicle. They're only there to help support the load and maximize the towing capacity that it can carry. Not only are these going to help support the load, but we're not going to have to worry about the back end of our truck sagging down and putting strain on our rear suspension. Not only are they going to give us that support, but they're also going to give us a nice, comfortable ride. Since they're going to mount in between our frame and our axle here, it's going to act as a shock absorber, taking the brunt of all those big bumps and uneven road conditions. Now these are a custom application. They're going to replace our factory joust stops, and it's going to come with all the hardware and brackets necessary to get it in place, and there's no cutting or welding required. In our application, we chose to put a T in so that we can control both of our airbags using one inflation valve. Now the kit does come with 2 inflation valves and the T is not included, but you can pick it up on our website. What you're really going to like about these airbags is the adjustability. If you tow a lot of different trailers, or if you have a lot of different loads that you carry in your truck, these are going to be a great option because we're going to be able to adjust to the load depending on what kind of pressure we put in our airbags. So when we're towing that heavy load or a heavy trailer, these airbags are going to make sure that our truck stays at the factory height, nice and level. Before we put our airbags in, we want to take a few measurements. And our rear fender, right in the center, it's going to be right about 35.5. We'll go ahead and measure the front as well. Now the front's going to be right about 39.5, and that's because we do have that different style bed on the back. So let's go ahead and add some weight and see what that does. So with the tank in the back, it's going to simulate either a heavy load or pulling a heavy trailer. And within the back, it actually dropped our back end about 1.5 inches. And it actually raised the front end up about 1/2 inch. So with the load in the back, we'll go ahead and take our truck on our test course and see how it handles. I can already tell you that it's very noticeable that there's a load in the back. It's a little more bouncy than normal, and going over these speed bumps is definitely a lot more noticeable than without the load. It's a lot more harsh and it bumps pretty hard. Now as we come up to our slalom course, again, I can definitely tell that there's a load back there. It just seems like it wants to roll a lot and the body wants to turn before the truck actually turns itself. It just kind of feels a little bit like it just needs to slow down and take my time. So we put the same load back in our truck, and with just 30 pounds, we got right back to that factory height at the rear fender. And since we're at the factory height at the back, we're also back to the factory height in the front, which means we're not going to have to worry about our headlights pointing too high and our steer tires coming up off the ground not having good traction. So now that we have the load back in and our airbags are set, let's go ahead and take it back on our test course and see how it handles. Now I immediately can tell you that I feel a difference back there. It doesn't feel like I have a big heavy load in the back, and I don't feel the back end sagging down. Going over the bumps isn't as harsh. Don't get me wrong, I can still feel the bumps, but it's not a jarring motion and it's not killing my back. Now we come up to the slalom course, I can feel a difference as well. It just genuinely seems like it's a lot more stable, and it does still have a little bit of roll to it, just like most trucks do, but it does genuinely seem like I can go a little bit faster and the roll is a lot more stable. To begin our installation, we're going to come to our rear axle, and directly above it we're going to have our factory joust stop. Now we're going to remove these. We're going to be using a 15mm socket to take out the 2 bolts holding it in place. And we can set these aside as they're not going to be getting reinstalled. So we can get ready to assemble our airbag brackets now. So you're going to want to grab a lower bracket from your kit, They're both the same, but you'll notice that one end is going to be a little bit more narrow and the other end is going to be a little bit wider. Now, depending if you have a gasoline or diesel motor is going to depend on which orientation the bracket is going to go. The thinner side is going to be for the gasoline motors and the wider side is going to be for the diesel motors. When we flip our bag over, we're also going to notice that's where our mounting hole is going to be. We're going to be using a 3/8 flange nut, and that's going to be the one that has a Threadlocker already pre-installed on it. So since our application is a diesel, we're going to want the large end of our lower bracket to go in between our leaf springs, which means we're going to mount our airbag using the hole farthest away or closest to the narrow side. So we can flip our bracket over so that the curved part is facing down away from the airbag. And for right now, we're just going to loosely thread that flange nut through the bracket and into the airbag. You just want to leave it hand tight for now because we will need to make a few adjustments and we can tighten it up later. Now on the top of the airbag, we're going to go ahead and remove the rubber plug. We can grab our air fitting, and again it's going to have Threadlocker pre-installed on it, and we're going to thread it directly into the top of our airbag. Now you're going to want to grab a 9/16 wrench and tighten that fitting up until all the Threadlocker is in the threads. Now we can get ready to assemble our upper brackets. Now they are labeled. Both upper brackets are going to be the same, but they're going to have a few different patterns of holes on them that we're going to use. Now if your truck is 4-wheel drive, you're going to be using the upper holes, and if it's 2-wheel drive, you're going to be using the lower holes. So we're going to grab our support brace bracket, and since our truck is 4-wheel drive, we're going to be using the upper ones. So we're going to line it up, and you want that square piece to go towards the side that has the 4 holes in it. And coming from the outside, going towards the inside, we're going to grab some 3/8 bolts. We're going to pass them through the 4 holes on our bracket. And then on the inside, we're going to secure them with some 3/8 lock nuts. I'm going to grab a 9/16 socket and wrench, and I'm going to tighten up those 3/8 bolts. The 2 outer holes are going to line up with the factory holes from our jout stop. So you may need to move some wiring a little bit, but we're going to line up our holes. Then we're going to take our flathead bolts, and we're going to loosely thread it into place, just so it'll hold the bracket and keep it from falling. We can grab a 6mm Allen bit and we'll tighten up our bolts. So we can grab our lower bracket and bag assembly and we can get it into place. I'm going to go around the shock, and that large tab that we were talking about, it's going to have some of those little ears on the end. You want these ears to go in between the U-bolts going around the axle and the leaf spring there. So we can compress the bag a little bit, and our fitting is going to go through one of the 2 of the large holes towards the front. And the top of our bag is also going to have this little alignment pin, and that's going to go towards the back. So we can kind of halfway line it up, figure out, and it doesn't matter which hole it goes into, it's just whichever one gives you the best vertical angle on it. So you want to loosely get it in place. And the way we're going to get the tabs by the leaf springs in is we're going to get one side in. Kind of want to angle the airbag a little bit so that they're both inside the U-bolts, and then we can come back with a hammer and just tap it down. So you want to make sure that lower bracket is sitting nice and flat and that both the tabs are inside the U-bolts. So you're going to want to compress the bag so you got enough room to feed the fitting up through the hole. And again, it doesn't matter which one you go through, it's just whichever one lines up the easiest. You want to make sure that alignment tab is in the back hole as well. Kind of give it a twist. If it doesn't move, you know you got it lined up. You're going to want to grab the 3/4 inch star washer. You're going to go over the fitting and over the large stud on top of the airbag. And then you can grab your 3/4 inch nut. We're going to loosely thread it in place and then double check that we're still lined up with that alignment pin in the back. And if not, we're going to make a little adjustment and then go ahead and tighten that nut up so it won't move. Then you're going to want to grab a 1 1/8 inch wrench and we're going to tighten up that 3/4 inch nut. Now there is very limited room, so you're probably going to want to use the open end of the wrench. And you don't need a crank on it, you just want to make sure it's nice and snug. Now with our airbag secure and our bracket in the correct position, we can go ahead and grab a 9/16 wrench and we can tighten up the bottom bolt holding the bracket to the bag. Now again, this is very limited space, so you probably want to use the open end of the wrench and just snug up that bolt on the bottom. So if you need to, you can kind of compress the bag moving upward and make sure you can tighten it all the way. If you did lift up to tighten up that bolt, just make sure that the lower bracket is seated all the way on the axle and those tabs are still on the inside of the U-bolts. We can grab our bail clamp and that's going to go around the axle. It's going that little notch right here on the lower bracket. So then we can grab the bottom, which is going to go on the bottom of our axle. We're going to line up the holes so that our bail clamp will go through. You want to make sure that round part is going on the bottom of the axle so it kind of follows the contours of everything. We can grab another one of our 3/8 lock nuts. And again, we're just going to loosely put them in place so it'll hold that bracket up. So then we're going to grab a 9/16 socket and we'll tighten up our bail clamp. Just want to alternate going between the two nuts so that it tightens up evenly and doesn't get in a bind. So with the driver's side installed, we can go ahead and repeat that same process on the passenger side. Now the only difference on the passenger side, besides the mirror image, is that we're going to have a heat shield that before we mount our bag to our upper bracket, you're going to want to slide this heat shield over the top. So we're going to get ready to install our airline tube, and you're going to want to find the center, and the easiest way to find the center is if you put the two ends together and then just run it down until you come to the end where the loop is going to be. And we're going to cut our airline tube in half. Now when you do cut it, you want to make sure you're using a tubing cutter so you have a nice straight even cut. So now we got two equal lengths with a nice clean cut. Now for our airline tube, we're simply just going to take it and find the end of our fitting. We're going to push it directly in, making sure that it bottoms out all the way, and give it a quick tug to make sure it locks into place. Now we're going to do that for the other side as well, and then we're going to route our airline tubes towards the back of the bumper, and everybody's going to do it a little bit differently. You just want to make sure that you stay away from any extreme heat sources or any moving parts. So I'll go ahead and run my airlines and show you how I did it. So here on the driver's side, I just looped my airline up, then I came down, and actually went into the frame right at the bottom here. I fed it through the frame until it came out in the very back. And then I have my airline tube hanging out right here. Now on the passenger side, since it was really close to the exhaust, I put that protective coating around the line to help protect it a little bit more. And then I ran it up over, running along the frame, went over the cross member by the spare tire, zip tying it along the way, and then again, I have it hanging down right here. Now in our application, we want one inflation valve to control both airbags. So we're going to be installing this push fitting T in place. So we're going to take our T, just like our airbags, we're just going to push our airline into one end, take our other airline and push it into the other end. Now you are going to need a little bit of airline but we can always disconnect and cut a piece off since we have so much excess. But let's go ahead and mount up our inflation valve. So we're going to be mounting our inflation valve right below our 7-way connector. And in order to do that, we're going to need to drill a hole. So you always want to double check to make sure there's nothing on the other side that may get damaged. So we're going to grab a 5/16 drill bit. We're going to drill right into the back of the bumper here. So we can grab our inflation valve, and we're going to take the cap off, set it aside. We're going to remove the nut, and then on the valve itself, we're going to take one of the flat washers that comes in our kit, slide it over the end. Then we're going to want to reach up behind the bumper and feed the end of it through. You're going to want to take another one of your flat washers, go over the end of the inflation valve, and then reinstall that nut. So now you're going to want to grab either 2 1/2-inch wrenches or a 1/2-inch wrench and socket, and we'll tighten the nut up while holding the inflation valve on the back side. Now, in order to get the airline out so we can have a little section go from our T to our inflation valve, if we push in on the airline, you'll notice it's got that small ring. You want to grab that ring and pull towards the T to be able to pull your airline out. Now, we have plenty of excess line, which I always like to just leave the line looped up. That way, in case there's any kind of repair or any kind of movement or any kind of rerouting that somebody wants to do down the road, they can. So we'll go ahead and cut a section off, again using our tubing cutter. We're going to put one end in our inflation valve. It's going to work the same way. We're just going to push it in until it bottoms out. Make sure it's locked into place. Plug into our T, and then finally get the other end of the line that we cut, plug it into there. Make sure all of our connections are tight. Now we can just loop up our excess airlines and tie them up out of the way. So now we can go ahead and test our system. I'm going to go ahead and take an air check and fill my bags up with some air so we can check for leaks. So it's got some soapy water. I'm going to spray down all my connection points. What we're looking for is bubbles. Now, these little bubbles that just show up from the soap, that's okay, but what we're looking for is for bubbles that keep expanding or that keep coming up, because that means we're going to have an air leak. So we're going to go ahead and spray down everything, make sure that we don't have any leaks. And that'll finish up your look at the Firestone Ride-Right air helper springs, part number F2299 on our 2008 Dodge Ram pickup.